Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Trib Live Radio Morning Show. Josh Taylor here with you in studio, joined by Kevin Gorman. And Kevin, you could pick a lot of things to talk about today, but we'll just start on the very front page and work our way from there. This morning's Trib pick parade on the cover of this morning's Trib. Last night's preseason game, second preseason game for the Steelers. Landry Jones throws 4 interceptions, and one of them returned for a touchdown, and there's no other way for it to be described other than it just looked plain ugly. I don't know. Now, you can make a case that maybe one of 2 of those weren't his fault, which might be fair, especially the one that was actually batted up in the end zone and caught for a touchback. You can argue whether or not that was his fault. But when you look at the scope of all of it, it just looked like a really big sea of ineffectiveness last night. Or deficiency, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, a total debacle offensively. I think it raises some questions, and you have to take into consideration this is a meaningless preseason game. You have to take into consideration all of the starters who weren't out there, that this isn't the true Steelers team. But you also have to take into consideration that the Steelers right now are without their backup quarterback, and that could be indefinite. We don't know.
And this guy could be their backup quarterback.
We don't know the extent of Bruce Gradkowski's injury. We do know that last year he was injured and lost for the season, and the Steelers had to kind of go between Landry Jones and Michael Vick. And although they made the playoffs with those 2 filling in for, I believe, 4 games and parts of 4 others, that's not the answer. We already kind of know that Landry Jones is a questionable backup in the NFL at this point. Is still as unproven as whether he can be an effective backup, and that did nothing to further his case of trying to show that he deserves that job.
Now, some could make the case just off what we saw in practice during training camp that Bruce Gradkowski, who was supposed to be the number 2 guy, or at least brought back to have a shot at the number 2 spot, didn't look very inspiring in practice either. So there wasn't a lot of confidence in Bruce Gradkowski, I don't think, amongst those that had actually seen him in practice. So if you're looking at the options of a struggling Bruce Gradkowski versus an even more struggling Landry Jones in game action, either way, it probably doesn't look too good.
No, but on the bright side, you do have to take into consideration that with the exception of the left tackle where there's a position battle between Villanueva and Harris, that the other 4 spots in the offensive line are pretty much solidified, that this should be one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, that it has the potential to have a couple of Pro Bowlers, if not all pros, lining up next to each other, and Pouncey and DeCastro, that this is a team that when healthy and when suspensions are all taken care of, that it should have Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback, you have Le'Veon Bell and D'Angelo Williams at running back, you have Antonio Brown as a wide receiver. There still are some question marks at tight end, potential number 2 receiver, whether that's Marcus Wheaton or someone else. But this is a team that should be much more effective, and that's why I don't put too much stock into last night's game. But I believe, and I think a lot of people around the NFL believe this, that you're only as good as the bottom of your roster. And I think that's where the Steelers right now are looking like they may not be up to snuff at the bottom of their roster, that the last 10 positions in that 53-man roster aren't good enough. And not only do they raise questions at prominent positions like quarterback, but also in the secondary, which is a major concern right now.
You mentioned the tight end position, which you said is still in question, and we saw Jesse James, and we've seen him through these first 2 preseason games. He's getting a lot of time out in the field. You can tell they're trying to get every single piece of information they can about whether or not he's ready to actually take this job as a starting tight end if Ladarius Green can't go.
Well, not only that, but you have to, and I think the same thing with Landry Jones, the number of reps he's getting, you have to decide whether these guys are capable of being, in Jesse James' case, a starter, in Landry Jones' case, a backup. And those are the decisions that are made in the preseason, during training camp, and in these preseason games.
So we'll talk more about that. Of course, there's a couple preseason games left. The season kicks off next month, and we'll have more discussion about that here on Trib Live Radio.